Hey, this will be. Whoa, sorry, the table's rocking. I'm here by the pool. They've finally opened up the pools in my complex once again. So they're about to close it down, but a couple of questions got sent to me by Rob Rod. And I was going to just answer him directly, but I realized they're really important questions. So his initial question was this: Steve, is a lot of this because we were talking about all the things going on with all the wrestlers and wrestling people. A lot of they're being accused of a lot of different things and abusive things. And so Rob asks, Steve, is a lot of this generationally taught? Like, I've seen my trainer do this, and his trainer did it as well, type of thing, for the people 35 and up. And so I wanted clarification. I said, I'm not sure what you're asking, because I wanted to be sure. And he said, in the course of your career, observing other people, is this course of sexual abuse generational? Whew, that's a big question. And then I kind of answered it briefly, but I wanted to answer it more in depth here. And then he asked a follow-up question: can someone be redeemed or get ahead of an accusation? I think if you listen to Cornet today, Cornet did about as good a job as you're going to do handling the things that he was accused of. Like I said in the full disclosure, the revelation of his kinks to the general public is one thing and really doesn't warrant outrage. It's just Stacy gets fucked and I like to watch, or whatever their thing is. No big deal. It's the imposition of power and the manipulation of power as it pertains to the wrestling business that would have been an issue. And apparently that's not an issue. At least Cornet did a phenomenal bang-up job of fighting against that accusation. So let me take on the first part. Is this kind of abuse a learned generational thing in the wrestling business? Yes, absolutely. And I would argue all sports and entertainment forms, which doesn't excuse wrestling. And in fact, wrestling has its own take on it. Japanese promotions, in fact, are incredibly abusive, or have been traditionally, in the training process. Not just physically, but especially with the smaller promotions. There's kind of like this weird sexual bent to them, sort of like the worst kind of fraternity initiation stuff that you can imagine. They go into a little bit of this in that book, Ring of Hell, which, by the way, people were so upset at Ring of Hell and said, like, oh, this is all sensationalistic crap. And they took shots at Randazzo, who now has reached a point where, when they had the Benoit documentary, which is the best thing that Dark Side of the Ring did, I'd say Dark Side of the Ring is probably the most overrated show about wrestling going on right now, because a lot of those were just flat out wrong, or they had very limited takes on things. A lot of Dark Side of the Ring was not good, but the Benoit stuff was phenomenal, and Randazzo is a huge reason why. And in that Ring of Hell book, by the way, he talks about Lagana and the things said about Lagana, which have now apparently come to pass. So I think a lot of people owe Randazzo a huge apology. But in that, Randazzo talks about how training in different Japanese promotions consisted of a bunch of guys jerking off into a cup and making somebody drink it and things like that. That kind of stuff happened. Did I experience it directly? No, thank goodness. But I definitely experienced stuff where I was put in an incredibly vulnerable position. And as much as I hated the person that I young boyed for, think about that relationship alone, right? You're assigned to a veteran wrestler who's supposed to take care of you, but you're supposed to be the de facto slave of. Does that open you up to all kinds of improprieties that will not be retaliated against because it's considered to be part of the business? Absolutely. As women have gotten involved more and more in the wrestling business, are men who have learned to abuse one another going to then turn their eye towards women, and if they are straight men, use that as an ability to sort of manipulate these women? Absolutely. Have we seen examples of that in Georgia wrestling, where older men have taken advantage of younger women? Absolutely. And it's learned. It's absolutely a learned behavior. And wrestling was always about those that have power, and knowledge is power, using that power to exploit those with the less power out of their money and resources and whatever else you could get out of them. People lament the loss of kayfabe, and I get it, but you have to understand that what kayfabe was a con to take people's money, to literally emotionally manipulate people so you could get more of their money. So there are tournaments that happened, and I believe it's Jericho who pointed this out in his book, and he's the only guy I've ever seen talk about this. I experienced it. You would wrestle in parts of Germany, and they did a thing where, like, it would be tournaments, but if you were caught doing an infraction in the ring, you would be fined. And then if you couldn't pay the fine, then the other person would win. And so what you would do is the heel would do cheating behind the referee's back, but the audience would see it. So the audience would be outraged. And then the babyface would respond in kind, but get caught by the referee, and you'd fine the babyface. Who would pay that fine? Someone from the audience. You would emotionally manipulate the people in the crowd so they would get this little momentary thrill of, I'll pay the fine. So it's like 5 marks or 10 marks or whatever the fine is. And then they'd rush up and pay that fine. And where would that fine money go? It'd go to the boys. They'd split it. Maybe the promotion would get a little bit as well. Is that okay to do? I bet as I tell that story, and you're a wrestling person, that excites you. But is that not deceptive? Is there something not incredibly dirty about that? I'll leave that question there. So, is this kind of abusive inequality power relationship? When the territories were strong, and you had between 1,000 and 2,000 wrestlers make their living from pro wrestling. Far cry from today, is it not? Yes. Don't tell me the wrestling business is bigger than it's ever been. There was a time where 1,000 to 2,000 professional wrestlers made their living wrestling through the territory system. Each one of those territories had a great deal of power, and they ran it like a fiefdom. And are you telling me that a lot of those promotions didn't have incredibly strange ways to deal with power dynamics? Do we need to go into the endless rumors? The Jim Barnett rumors? Paul Bosch? All these guys had their own predilections and picadillos. And even today, right? If I say Bert, that inspires a feeling in people who know who I'm talking about, does it not? We are going through a sea change in wrestling, and I think it's a very positive one overall. But, as I've said many times before, when the pendulum swings this way, and keep in mind the pendulum has been on this side for a long time, those in power abusing those in not, or those who don't have as much power. And then when those people get to be in positions of power, they then exploit the people underneath them. Fabulous Moolah. The people who take an extreme position on Fabulous Moolah, one way or the other, are missing the whole point. Did Fabulous Moolah abuse and manipulate and exploit the women under her charge? Absolutely. To some extent, at least, but probably to a great extent. Did she learn that somewhere else? Yes. Was she exploited worse? Perhaps. Maybe. Doesn't excuse the behavior. And for the people that say, well, but you can't excuse it because it's a learned behavior, but you can understand it and make the connections. So the answer, everybody, is yes. As my trainer did to me, so I do in turn. It becomes normalized. That's why the locker room, we talk a lot about who's got the good locker rooms in the business and blah, 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 blah. But the real question is, who's got the good people in charge who aren't lying, who aren't manipulating, who aren't going out of their way to bullshit their fans and the people under their charge? There is no doubt that wrestling comes from a carny tradition. And if you want to talk about exploiting, if you want to talk about abuse of your customers as well as your performers, it's hard to beat the carnival, is it not? Literally, their business is based on conning, being salacious, and taking advantage of people's differences in order to make money off of them. That they make some money, yes, but ultimately the power structure has never been in doubt. But the flip of that is wrestling used to be the power abuses used to be taught generationally, but now the dynamic is even worse because now being a great talent doesn't give you as much power as it used to. Bruiser Brody does not exist anymore, and Bruiser Brody, by the way, used to abuse his power as well. I love Bruiser Brody. He's my fave, but I gotta call it what it is. But here's the flip. As promotions go towards not being star-based, but being all about the promotion, where does that put all the power? Puts it squarely back in the hands of the booker and promoter. And is that going to lead to more abuse? Yes. The only thing that prevents more abuse is the fact that there are so many promotions. It's kind of like back in the territory days, except more so. And the fact that people are realizing that the road to the top doesn't really go through indie promotions. That's the truth also. Can you fight accusations? Yes. I said it takes a combination of a very rare set of skills, though. Somebody who's savvy enough to get their story out, someone who's savvy enough to be able to communicate effectively, and somebody who isn't a scumbag and is right in the first place. Those people are in short supply. And as I saw today on Facebook, a couple of like Georgia wrestling people sort of have returned to Facebook for the first time in a long time, and they come out with the dumbest posts imaginable. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, so, short answer, stop being a scumbag and insulate yourself with the truth. And realize that longing for the days where wrestling was a different kind of thing is understandable. However, wanting those certain aspects of the old days back, like the fact that the game was exclusively about stealing and manipulating everybody around you, those days are gone. And frankly, I'm fucking glad they are. This has been Ask Platinum.